Hey, what's up, guys? In our first video, we briefly talked about the routing, how controllers come into the handling of routes. But today, in this video, let's go a little more deep into routing and see what are some of the options that are available within the framework for us to work with. Okay, so I'll go point by point over here and try to cover as much as possible. There are quite a few things within this framework to work with routes. And yeah, basically we will be looking at most of the options, I would say. So yes, the first thing that we need to understand is the framework looks for the main routes.ts inside the start folder, which is the entry point, and this is where all the routes are defined. This, for example, is a route. This is a route. All these are get URLs. Okay. And this is the home route. Okay. Anything over here, this word basically translates into a slug. I can even do things like test, comma, hello, and this should also work. Let me see if my instance is not running. So node is serve with watch flag, and it will start the application on localhost 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this. So this is one of the basic URLs that we can form. Okay. Now, again, although I have covered it, but if you are watching this video directly, a route can be a closure, which means it can define what needs to be returned within itself, or it can mention a controller from where that particular URL will be handled, which is something like this, where we are saying that the URL name is controller and the test controller's index method should handle it. And then there is controller2, which is a different format, but I'm saying that this route should be handled by test controller index. Obviously, this is a different syntax. Okay, moving along. Now, as I told you, all the default routes are loaded from, or rather preloaded from these files. This file, not these, but rather this file. Now, it can happen that you decide to take a modular approach and some of your routes are based on the module or the domain of the application. For example, if you're creating a shopping cart application, you may have certain routes which are products and product details. So like product/1, product/2, or maybe you are using, obviously you will be using slugs. So let's say all your product related routes are inside one file. Then all your cart related things are in one file, order related things are in one file. So I mean, one things as in the routes, right? So if you want to do that kind of a separation, what you can do is, let's just say expense. Now the naming convention, you can put anything. The important piece is copy this. For some reason, right, I am not able to get that autocomplete inside VS Code, so I'm just copying that. But yeah, so expense controller, that I will import. So what we are doing, we have created a new file where we have defined expenses 3, and I have returned it from the main route. Now let's go to that URL and try to see what happens. Expense 3. Obviously, it will give me a 404, route not found. Why? Because we have created a file, but we have never told Adonis to load that particular file or to look for a route within that file, right? So how will it understand? So one way of doing it is import and then this. With this, if I now hit refresh, I see the proper thing. So as you can see, inside index, I'm returning test expense controller. Right, but then if you don't want to explicitly define here, you can avoid that. What you can do over here inside Adonis RC, which is a little interesting because I'm not able to find that file, and I wonder why. Let's look at the documentation. Okay, so this is something which we looked at, import inside routes.ts. Okay, Adonis rc.json, Adonis, oh yeah, my bad. Adonis rc.json, let's look at preload. Yes, so as you can see, there's JSON is loading routes from the start folder and the kernel. So now if I do something like start expense routes, okay, and hit refresh, it still works. Why? Because I have defined it over here. If I remove this entry, right, the server restarted, again we get a 404. So this thing works, right? But before going on, so basically we can understand from these two things is that there are different ways of mentioning the routes. We can have routes within the main routes.ts file. We can have it as a different file and then import it within the main routes file, or we can use this Adonis rc.json to preload these files. Right? And there are three approaches. You are free to own to use any one of them. Now this is a little bit of a DX thing. We get a command which is node ace, which allows us to look at all the routes. For those who have some Laravel experience, you will know that this is something which we get as route and route colon list. So this is list routes, and we get this table. Obviously, if you want, we can do JSON, and it gives me a JSON output. So in case you want to do something with it, and yes, because you get the JSON output in terminal, you can create a JSON file out of it as well. So you pipe everything to, or rather, print everything to this routes.json file. If I would like to show you, so this is test.json. So yes, nothing will be in the terminal output, but there should be a new file called test.json, and inside the test.json you can see that the entire JSON object is printed. So yes, this is handy if you want to export some things for some reference. Okay, all right, moving along, we have, like any other frameworks, all the verbs available inside our routes. We have post, put, patch, delete, okay, and rest of all the HTTP verbs. We can even do combinations. So I would encourage you to go through this. For get, we can do a browser-based thing, and for everything else, we will need to unfortunately use a postman, which I will not do right now because I don't have a database itself. So I don't think I'll be able to do things like delete and patch and put right now. Okay, so we will look into that when we are doing our databases. Okay, now this is a wildcard thing where if you do any, then basically you can handle all the routes, which is fine if you want to do that. But I typically want to be a little explicit with my thing so that I know what exactly is running. Now, the next thing I think any routing library would give you, and which is a very important and integral part of any routing thing, is the parameters. Right? For example, if you take one of our routes, we have expenses, right? So let's make it expense. Okay, and what we are saying is when the route is expense, we show, we call the index method and we show, let's say, all the expenses which are available in the application. And then there is one more route. View / ID. Okay, what I'll do is just steal a little bit of code from here so that this is fast, and I should name this something different. So view Okay. Right. So we have a new route, which is expense/view and then this parameter. One thing which I can actually do is shorten this up a little bit more and do something like this. It's a one-liner, because if we are returning only one thing, then we don't need those braces and everything. I can directly do this, which means it will return a new instance of express controller dot and another view. Okay. So, and yeah, we are passing the context. So now in here, return response.send, let's just say view expenses. Okay. This is straightforward. I have done nothing extraordinary over here, but we will go through, we will expand this to have more details. So let's just come over here and now one. So we have view expenses. Now, how do we refer to this? Right? So the option over here is obviously dollar. I think I need to use the params, and then we have ID. I think it should work if I'm not wrong. Let's see. Yes. So 2A B, right? So this means we are able to send anything in this parameter, and then we get that inside our controller and even in the route if it's a closure. Okay, but sometimes it is possible that we want to have optional parameters as well. For example, you may want to somehow give an ID, but if the ID is not present, you show all the expenses, something like that, some request which is like this. In that case, what you can do is you can make this optional, because right now if I go to, let's just say here, and I remove the parameter, it gives me a not found error. Why? It is giving me a not found error because the route pattern doesn't match with the current route, because that slash and then something there was not present. So right now it is expecting anything, but at least it is expecting one thing in that parameter. Something should be there in the URL, right? Now, if I want to make it optional, I can just put a question mark, and immediately you will see that we get the page which says view expenses undefined. So it is able to detect that the parameter is not present, and we are able to handle that kind of a situation, because I can then always do something like if not params.id, maybe please provide an ID, something like that, which will mean it changes, right? So yeah, that is how an optional parameter can be added for us to handle the application accordingly. All right, moving along. So we have seen optional parameters, and then there are situations where you can have wildcard, which means you don't know how many parameters are going to come. And something along the lines, I won't say this is the best example, but I remember I was using this, which is just read content articles, and this. What had happened is, if you see, this is category travel, web category, and this, and when I go to any URL, this is the kind of parameter, and I was not able to get a proper thing unless and until I make this as the route, and then this is the slug. So what I did instead was use a wildcard. Again, just an example. So what can happen is, what I'm saying, when you have a situation where you don't know how many parameters are going to come inside a URL, you can do wildcard. So let me show you. Let me give you an example. So let's make this a star. Okay, let's get rid of this parameter ID, and why don't we just do this? Obviously it has nothing in it, so it will not show but now you can see it has star and then A, B, and C. So it is giving me all the segments or all the sections of that slug, and that is very important for us to understand. Okay, so yeah, in case of wildcards, you could do this, but obviously you need to understand that you can only how to say that you can only target specific sections of the URL through quote. I mean, because it is giving an array of all the keys within star. You don't know what is coming where, right? So you may have to do certain checks like, if the param's first key is A and then second key is B, then do this, that kind of a thing, okay? Because in the wildcard, you will not understand what is coming. So yeah, you can even do a fixed parameter and then wildcard, so that also works. Now, important thing, next section is the parameters matcher. Okay, parameter matcher is almost like you running a validation of the URL without actually running any database queries. Why this is important? So let's just say we have a very basic level of route, which so if you remember, let me go back to the original type of route which I had. Okay, so this is ID and this is params, which is fine. I do 1. So it says ID is 1, that is fine. This is ID is A, this is also fine. What about this? This doesn't make any sense, right? And for me, let's just say when we are trying to show an expense, if I want to do a query where ID is equal to underscore, if I'm making that query, I am wasting my resources. Why? Because I know this is not an ID. So what basically we are saying is, if you go to this documentation, right, there's a pattern match where I'm saying that where ID is within this pattern. So let's copy that and see what happens. Inside our route, I paste that, come over here, and here you go. We get a not found exception. The beauty is it basically validated the route. It hasn't gone into the next step. As far as the request lifecycle goes, it should have, ideally it will then, from a route, it will go to the middleware and then to the controller, and then the controller will make a query, and then it will understand, oh, underscore is not an ID, but now I'm able to say, this is my pattern, and the underscore doesn't fit into that pattern, so it gives me a 404. If I do 1, it works. If I do A, it doesn't work, right? Because right now our pattern is a number. The example over here, the next one, let me copy this. As you can understand, this accepts A to Z. So I paste it here. Oops. Right. And we get A as well. But we said it was only small case, and hence I don't get capital case as a valid URL. So you understand that you can do a lot of good checks at your route level to have some hygiene check on your URL, and you don't need to run queries on the database and waste your resources, right? Okay, so moving along, I think we have covered quite a few things. We have these kind of pattern matching which we saw, numbers, alphanumeric, And as it says, a 404 is returned when we are unable to find a match. Okay, so if the pattern doesn't match, we return a 404. Now, one more important and interesting thing is that we can do something like this. So, for example, logically speaking, whenever we are doing ID, and if you are following a proper pattern, there's always an if and a but. So if you are following a pattern in your application, your ID should ideally be a number. Or if you are saying it's an alphanumeric, then the basic thing is you cannot have one column which is a UUID or something else, and then one column which is only following numbers. This is not a proper design. So when your design is correct, what you can do is, instead of defining it in every controller, we just come over here and put it in. So we are saying in our application, whenever the param is ID, please consider this is the match. Immediately, we should be seeing all the other routes failing. Only this number should work. And that is the beauty. We have defined it over here, and every other file or route, even if you can see, I'm looking at this route, right, which doesn't even have this expression, right, but still it is able to understand that because this is an ID, it needs to match this pattern. Okay, so that's again pretty handy stuff, and you should use it as a basic, validation logic. Okay, moving along, param casting. Now, param casting is important. I don't know if I'm able to show you, but yeah, I think you will understand. Right now, can you see that there are quotes to the number 1? So this is basically a string, right? Right now, the framework, when it will work with these parameters, Adonis will think that this is not a number but a string. But then I know, because this is an ID, it has to be a number, right? I mean, that's the pattern which I'm saying. So what we can do is, inside here, we also have the option to first define the match, and then let's cast ID, number ID. So what is going to happen? Let's refresh this. Can you see that the quote is gone? Correct? Why? Because now Adonis understands that this is a number. So console.log params ID is JavaScript, check if number, right? Check if variable is a number, right? So what does it do? Is nan. I understand that is nan is not the best way of checking a number, because type of nan equals number. Yes, I think this is the one which may give me accurate result. Let's just see. Hit refresh, and it says false, which is fine. Right now it is not a number. And then if I hit save again, refresh, obviously it is going to fail. My bad. This is true. So yes, as you can see, this is one check which ensures that this is coming as a number, right? So that's the good thing, because you will automatically get that typecasting into the variables, and that makes a little more sense. Okay, so yeah, there are a few inbuilt matches available with us. For example, we can do numbers, UUID, slug, those kind of stuff. Okay, now the last thing which I would like to touch upon is URL generation. URL generation is very much like within the application. If you are trying to create a URL of one particular route programmatically, right, you should be using that. For example, let's just say, I'll show you an example over here. What I will do is params, oops, not array. So I was basically, I have this habit of doing this kind of an array because of my PHP experience, but yes, I'm slowly getting used to it. So sorry about that. URL route, oops, not router, route dot, okay, I need to copy this again. For some reason, this route doesn't come into Adonis JS. I don't know why. Okay, so this is make URL, and then the name of the route. So let's just say we have this, right? This route doesn't have a name. We can give it a name. This is a better way of naming your routes. Naming your route helps because throughout the application, you can reference this route as expense view. Okay, something like this. What happened? Route.get, correct. Name string, correct. So what is the problem? A unique name to look up. Is there already a name attached to it? I don't think so. I'll do a comment on that, and it is still complaining. Something is not right. Is it as, I think I was making a mistake. Expense view, yes. So this route will be aliased as expense view, okay, and I don't then need to hardcode the URLs within my application. The reason is, let's just say I am trying to send a URL something like expense slash view, okay, and then let's just assume we are doing, oh, this is not PHP, so params.id, okay. I want to do this. Obviously, if I come over here, you can see the URL is appended. But then the problem is tomorrow, if for some reason, again, it is hypothetical, but if I try to change this to view to something else, right? Show. Now, what is going to happen is, right now there is only one instance, but if I have multiple instances, I need to change it everywhere, correct? And because it is a string, you will not even get any type of type hinting because TypeScript doesn't know as well. So you are in a big problem. But if I want to get rid of that kind of a problem, what I can do is route dot make URL expense view id, and let's just say params.id. And now what happened? Yeah, I'm getting the same result, which means the code is working where I was previously concatenating. But you know what the best part is? Now if I do store or anything, okay, the URL needs to obviously change, but you can see my response has changed. Why? Because I was aliasing the name of the route. So this as, right, I'm referencing that, and I'm not referencing the URL itself. So no matter what happens, what I am returning is going to get updated automatically, correct? And one interesting piece is make signed URL. Okay, it takes one more parameter. I think it expires in 5 minutes. So what is going to happen now? Now, can you see it has a token in it? Signature equals this. This means you can have certain cases where you want to validate a URL. You want to make that URL stick for a certain time, and then after that you may want to stop the access to that particular URL, right? And that is a perfect condition where you want to have this kind of a thing, right? So yes, that's what signed URL is, make signed URL. So yeah, that's about it, guys. That's some of the interesting and important functions available with routing in Adonis JS. This documentation is very well written, and what I have done basically is visually shown you how every example works, how your application can basically use them. And yeah, I would encourage you to go through the documentation, try them out, play around with them, and you will definitely understand them better, and you will be able to come up with other options as well. For example, I just managed to discover this make signed URL even without reading the document, because that thing is not here described over here. It was somewhere else. But yeah, experiment, and that's about it. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.